Yeah. Well, one of those things is you get kind of, it's difficult to speak into the phone when you're talking in the streets and all that kind of stuff. Especially if I was to raise my voice and start talking about travellers this and travellers that. Even the cars would move out of the way, even if there's nobody in them. But anyhow, just a beautiful day in Sligo, and I'm going to take a quick walk around the town like an idiot. Well, I'm not like an idiot, it's doing me good. You think I was out a lot. People keep saying to me, well, family keeps thinking that I'm on sunbeds, that this isn't the natural light. And I'm waiting for some smart ass to say something, then I'll show them my arse. That will show that there was no sunbeds involved. But anyhow, these are little things, funny, in my head anyway, at least. But a beautiful day in Sligo, and everybody going about their business. Well, there's a lot of deep depression in this country. Well, not I say there is, I know there is. Sligo really gets treated like shit by the east of the country. The Colonial Pale. Can't say too much about that because I'm going to Dublin soon doing art projects using the power of Sligo. It's magnetic and magical forces that make Sligo unique and special. I find it strongest when I'm in Sligo. That's not being biased because I grew up there. Actually, that is being biased because I grew up there. But also many other legends, as if in some way I'm incorporating myself into them categories. But there has been many legends from Sligo. Four masters. There's actually a descendant of one of the four masters in Sligo. I forget his name. I'm not very good at Irish names. I can imagine what I'm like with other people's names. I'm not even good with my own family's names. I grew up in that kind of family with a large family and you called every other name but your own one, eventually. But yeah, there's a guy who's a descendant of the four masters. Four masters were these kind of paper bookkeepers, and they would write the history and chronologies or some word like that to use, I think. But basically anyway, they write down what happened, when it happened, and give a fair, just account as best they could. The reason I'm saying this is that Sligo has that kind of unique, special historical situation where it wasn't colonised. Not like Cavan anyway. Not like the rest of the country in most parts. I'd say the majority. But it doesn't mean it isn't colonial colonised now, because when you have got colonial companies, money empires, they're the same as colonial powers. They are colonial powers. People here, when I talk about history or talk about something that happened 1,000 years ago, but if something happened a long time ago and it's still having its effects today, that means that thing isn't working best it could or it should, and it needs to be changed or addressed. Doesn't mean you change languages or systems or so on and so forth. It's about changing your mentality, your narrative, the way we see things, the way we think we understand things. I think one of the things when you're outside of the education systems is that you think differently. You might find this a lot with people too that may have dropped out of school for one reason or another. Not condemning the school or the education system. I am actually condemning the education system or the curriculum, one or the other. We'll go into that later. But my point is that some people do drop out because they think differently. Every human being on the planet thinks differently, even if we do have shared mentalities and shared languages and shared cultures and all that goes with that. The point would be is that every mind is unique. You can get identical twins and you can find 103 different differences if you wanted to. The reason I'm saying all of this is because it's part of the documentaries, it'll be part of the films, part of a lot of other various projects, the art projects that we're going to go into. And again, it's not rebellious, it's not revolutionary. It's really just knowledge, understanding. And again, I come from this as an Irish traveller who didn't go through the colonial systems. And actually Sligo has a lot of that too. Like not far from up here, they call it the Hill. Up there yonder Up there yonder are all of my relations, but they just don't know it yet. People think we're the ones that are different, the outsiders. We couldn't be any more insiders in our own islands, our own culture, our own identity. Crushed, crumbled, shattered, scattered, torn, tortured. We see this every single day. Situation in Cork, in Spring Lane, where families forced to live in absolutely human vile conditions. People say, why do they? Why should they? Why don't they live like us? Why don't they be normal like everybody else? I guess coming from the Sligo traveller mentality, we would say that there's no normal on this island. It's not normal to be invaded. Well, maybe a time there was. But to be colonised and to be subjectified to all tortures and humiliations. That's what Ireland went through. So when we say travellers and settlers, when we rewind the time just a little, the traveller label fades away and it becomes something else. It's thinkers, itinerants, hedge people, bogs people, woods people. Labels after labels. And these labels don't just go back decades, they go back centuries, even though thousands of years, I'd say. And one of the first ones I think we got called was the Gaels, Celtic people. From then it was just labels after labels. Some of them we grab. It's a bit like if you're going to shout in our faces when we're powerless, when you're going to abuse us while we're held prisoners in a psychological colonial Ireland, we'll take them labels sometimes. We'll grab them and we'll wear them. And we'll tell you it'll make no difference what you call us, what you try to do to us, where you try to put us, how you portray us. We are Irish. And that is the fundamental. When I say Irish, I'm not trying to create this national. We're Irish. That's a bit Scottish. We're Scottish is Irish, it doesn't matter. All of them are labels. Countries are labels. You look at most countries today, they're run like companies. People think that's a good thing. Let me try to explain another way of looking at this. Pretend in your head Sligo is a very special place. Again, if you're from Sligo, that should be very easy. But imagine it a bit like this, for the sake of talking shite into the phone, and probably never put it out in public anyhow. Cough, street cleared. Anyhow, Sligo is that unique, special place, and there's no doubt about it, right? So let's pretend that Sligo was the last, the Alamo, the fort, or maybe the Alamo's not a good one. I think they were killing native people, so fuck that. Or maybe they weren't. I'll have to look into history again. But the point is that Sligo was like this kind of, people call it a garrison town, like a former English colony, Normans, so on and so forth. And there is truths, little truths in that. But Sligo was a very diverse place. It had Catholics, it had Protestants, it had Irish, it had Scottish, it had Welsh, it had English, it had Normans and Vikings, and just about anybody else you can think of. Now, if you take that and place that diversity centuries ago, you know, we're talking about diversity there, we had diversity centuries ago. Anyhow, they all came together and said, look, fuck this game of cowboys. These are nut jobs up in Dublin. Take. Kill. And then they got to a point long into that it's like an artificial education, artificial intelligence. It's difficult to say that it's intelligence, but it's a form of artificial education. And you'll see this sometimes in people when they are so strict by the book, word for word, follows the manual, the script, whatever it might be. And these are quite systematic. These are brilliant traits, of course, in procedures, legal, medical, so on and so forth. I guess I am talking straight. But the point is, anyway, imagination, all of that outside. Sligo, diverse, highly skilled, educated, intelligent people. But we're up against it. I'm not sure if Leitrim helped us out. I think they did, actually. Another place I kind of like is Limerick. We'll go to that place. It has a unique story. One that they stood with the Irish, but paid dearly for it. Anyhow, Sligo is this unique, special place, and it wasn't colonised by the English. It has a kind of a different mentality, slightly more so than maybe other parts. Now, if you look at Dublin, Dublin was always like in an English colony. It was an English-speaking, building, feeling, sleeping, talking mentality for the best part of 1,000 years. It's only 500 years ago since they started aiding and abetting the support of their cousins, they're English, England, London, whatever you want to call it. So they were the gateway into Ireland to colonise it. So a lot of people came. People say the Romans never came to Ireland. They colonised it. But it wasn't the colonial empire soldier. It was the religion part of it. But anyhow, go back into Sligo. All that shit was happening. All that was coming at us. That's why Sligo gets forgotten about when it comes to the National Development Plan. We look at the Shaft, it's not Shaft, his name. Anyhow, they're all got different names. Settled politician in Dublin, he'd be looking out and he'd be talking about rural Ireland. Some will tell you we don't understand rural Ireland. Others can't understand Sligo. They don't know what to do with it. And the politicians you do have in it are mirroring and copying and trying to emulate the politics in the East, the colonial politics. Oh, go to school, get a job, that's the life, and all this kind of stuff. Nothing wrong with it in many regards, but when it becomes so systematic that it only works for very few and punishes a whole lot of people in between. So Sligo had that unique kind of foundation, yeah, and it had kind of a mixed, diverse people. It wasn't into the racism. It's a bit like going back to the Gaels and the Romans came to peace treaty in England before the English came along. The Saxons, I should say, they created the English. There was like 300 or 400 years of, well, all historians, these guys who study history, will tell you that it was a great place to be, great time to be. There were very little or no conflicts. There was no race issues. And this is going back hundreds of years. So this is where our culture stems from, came from, part of, which and still is to this day in Ireland. This is why you think travellers are different. Well, everybody thinks we're different, but not in the past. You only think it's different now because they've adapted to a new mentality. So even Irish people, your ancestors, Irish travellers, you want to call them. Remember, I told you, all the different labels going back. The odd thing, strange thing, not that strange anymore, was that we were the only group of people called all these different labels. Yet we were the same people, it was the same culture, same tradition, same self-belonging, and same issues with the colonial world. So this other group, the dominant group, who call themselves the Irish people now, are settled people. We call them settled, they call themselves settled. The English call them settled. Part of the English conquest was to settle Ireland, I think a few different times, and then along came Dublin, I think in 1922, who were using the English to pigeonhole Ireland. Basically they were a gateway for the English to come back into, or not to come back in, but to take its foundation there. So Dublin, the Pay, wasn't this small little place, a group of people. Prior to that was the Vikings, and who prior to that had killed the indigenous people that were there most likely, or scattered them off. The point of all of this is that in 1922, George Lloyd fucking something, he was the English Prime Minister around that time. And their idea again, once again, after the Colonial project to settle Ireland, this time it was to settle Dublin. In other words, once it knew it had to pull out its physical presence from Ireland, it left like the four pillars of its foundation of any colonisation, whether that's the religious institutions, the political institutions, the legal, in other words, it kept all the English laws, kept all the English systems. That's why you got King's Inn College in Dublin. That's why you got the Royal College of Surgeons in Dublin, Trinity College, Maynooth College. All of these are English institutions. Again, this is not a big cry out, take them all down and change them. These are the lives people are living in now. They may believe themselves to be evolved culture and so on and so forth, but when you take a step back, like when you're in Sligo, you see it kind of differently, because what you see happening to Ireland it didn't just happen to Ireland. We may have been one of the first countries to be colonised by the English, but we weren't the last. But what happened here in Ireland was that during the centuries of brutality and subjugation of an indigenous people, shifting their mentality, shifting their language, shifting their way of being. And the whole idea was to get them locked into a English way of thinking. Again, people think that's not the best thing, worst thing in the world. Are you down, bud? We have the language now, we're using it. It's like a program, it's like a software, once you understand it. But what's happening with the Irish people was that they were subjectified into these systems for centuries. So every childhood, every generation that grows up thereafter would be growing up in a colonial environment one way or the other. Again, a lot of settled people don't like to hear this. But if you think about this, when people from other parts of the world wouldn't really be able to distinguish Irish from English or Scottish or Welsh because of maybe our skin complexion, unless we spoke and our accents became a little more obvious to them. It takes time. In the same way, if we went to the African continent, we may not know people's religions or cultures or backgrounds by their skin complexion. So vice versa. So when we say Africa, we know now Africa is a big continent with lots and lots of countries. When we say Europe, we know Europe is a big continent with lots and lots of countries. But yeah, we get called the Western culture, the Western mentality, the imperial mentality. And the reality is, from a Sligo perspective, is that Ireland was never part of them systems in the first place. Our societies were based in honour. Again, this is not about going back to the old times. What does this matter now? I think you might have picked up the part where in 1922 nothing had changed. All the institutions and the education kept flowing, streaming with an imperial colonial mentality. Now, Dublin has a unique identity, but it's not the Irish identity. I think they all know this. Any smart people would know this, because for one, Dublin was the English Pale. It was an English colony. It wasn't Irish, it was English. It was designed that way, and it had maintained that for a very, very, very long time. Centuries had passed, and they were in these Englishy type mentality. They already had adapted it. Put a Danish in there too, no doubt. But the point is that Dublin has its own unique identity, that is not the Irish. And the robbing and the stealing and the wealth of everything else in this country under the disguise that they are the Irish. That is not the case. It's not even the reality. We know that there's variations in the settled population. Like, I'll give you an example. If you take rural, they've got their own particular mentality. You take the townspeople, they've got their own particular mentality. You take the people in the cities, they've got their own particular mentality. But when you take it a step back and take away that, and you see all settled people, that doesn't work that way either. Because you've got working classes, you've got middle classes, you've got elites. You've got all these categories and divisions within the system. It's almost impossible to keep up with their labels and their continuation of coming up with new words that are endless, that you can pile them up like numbers, one on top of another. Again, treaties and all these contracts, always wiggling the way out, taking countries, taking lands and resources. In many, many, many ways, that has not ended. If anything, it has escalated. For the simple reason is, go back to the beginning of all the colonialization, or colonization, you will find that there was three mixes in the empire of all of that. One was the political, the royal colonization. The other was the religious, brainwashing colonization. The third were the privateers, the companies that went very unnoticed and quiet throughout history. And it's been these money empires ever since, particularly the breakdown of its own system, where every nutjob now starves, lives, kills for money, power and success. And where the fuck are they all going with it? All living on a one planet together in space, right beside a big burning star, doing about 1,000 miles maybe per second into your bliss. We have a lot to do, and that's what I'm going to hope to do when I get to Dublin. Have a nice day, my friends, while I go into the second-hand shops.